assumption behind the proficiency myth was pronunciation. That native speakers have better pronunciation, basically, however you want to put it. And there are three little assumptions behind this. I like going in threes. Okay? So the first assumption is that native speakers speak with the correct accent. The second one is that native speakers make better models of proficiency. And the third one is that as students, if they have classes with native speakers, their proficiency will improve more. Okay? So these three arguments. Let's look at them one by one, shall we? So, first of all, something such as correct pronunciation doesn't exist. Linguistically speaking, there's no objective reason why one pronunciation or one accent should be better than any other pronunciation. I mean, there are obvious reasons of power and privilege. However, those reasons would take us back to George Bernard Shaw Pygmalion, where people had to change their accent in order to sound more educated, because otherwise they would sound uncouth and vulgar or funny at best. If you ask me, this is pronunciation apartheid, and I don't think we want to go down this route, right? And there's a lot of that pronunciation apartheid when it comes to non-native speakers' pronunciation. Because if you think about it, our assumption is that any native speaker pronunciation is better than any non-native speaker one, right? The more native-like a student's pronunciation, the better, the more intelligible they're going to be. But is that really true? Well, I'm skeptical. I really don't think it's true. So let me start with a story. My cousin is a successful Polish businessman, and he runs an international company building stalls for international fairs. So he has business meetings with people around the world, he strikes business deals, he gives conference talks, holds meetings on Skype, does all the things that a successful businessman does, all in English. So some time ago I was talking to him, and he seemed really nervous, almost as nervous as I feel now. And he was, he was just going like this, his palms were sweating, and he was looking at his watch all the time. And I was like, what's wrong, Robert? Why are you so nervous? So, oh, I've got this business meeting in half an hour. So, okay, but you've got business meeting every single day. Well, why are you so nervous? So, oh, this business meeting is different. It's really different. So, how is it different? So, oh, the clients, they're different. So, how are they different? Are you striking a multi-million-dollar deal? It's like, no, the clients are British, he whispered. And for a second, I was puzzled. I was like, what do you mean they're British, and so what? And he told me that he stresses any time he's got meetings with native English speakers. Do you know why? Because he can't understand what they're talking about. I mean, he can pick up every other word and kind of nod in agreement, but he's not really sure what they're talking about. He can having meetings with the Mexicans, the Brazilians, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, that's all fine. No problems. Everyone understands each other. But as soon as a native speaker walks into the room, that's it. End of conversation. And you could argue, and we often would in teaching languages, that it's my cousin's fault. His English simply isn't good enough, right? He needs to improve his proficiency. That's why he can't understand native speakers. However, would you really argue something like that about somebody who's bilingual, who does business meetings all around the world and is very good at what he's doing? I wouldn't. I would instead argue that not all native speakers are better models of pronunciation. Not all of them, you see, especially when it comes to international English. But you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Marek, I'm with you on that, but what do I teach then? If I don't teach standard British or general American pronunciation, then what do I teach? Well, it's a very good question, and there's a very good practical answer to it. And that answer is Lingua Franca Core, or LFC for short. LFC was developed by Professor Jennifer Jenkins in the late 90s and early 2000s. And she was teaching groups of international students in the UK. who came to Britain to learn the proper English, the Queen's English, the correct pronunciation. And as soon as they left the class, Jenkins noticed that they were breaking every single rule in the pronunciation book. They had all these horrible accents, foreign accents, and the word stress was all over the place. There were no weak forms and so on, but they were communicating. So she started thinking about it. I mean, what's going on here? That they don't really sound like native speakers, but anyhow, they're very intelligible. And in English language teaching and in other modern foreign language pedagogies, we have this underlying assumption that the more native-like the pronunciation, the better. That's why we teach either standard British or general American English. But Jenkins decided to put this assumption aside for a second, and what she did, she started with no assumptions. So she started recording those students, transcribing the recordings, analyzing them to find out which pronunciation features are actually important in international communication, and which pronunciation features perhaps aren't important or can in fact reduce intelligibility. And what she found out, she called the lingua franca core. And the pronunciation features that are important for intelligibility are long and short vowels, all consonants except the th or the th sound, nuclear stress, so that's the most prominent stress in a given utterance. For example, this is not his book, it's her book. Or, this is not his book, it's his laptop. So that's nuclear stress. And finally, consonant clusters, so that's when two or more consonants come together. And since Jenkins did that pioneering research, a lot of research has been done in this area, and it all seems to be pointing in the same direction. What's interesting as well is that the features of pronunciation, which we would typically think of as very native-like, such as, for example, connected speech, things like gotcha, did you, weak forms, so saying things like, do you know, instead of saying, do you know? Yeah? Things that, I used to drill to my students so much, and I would smile when they finally got it right, because it made them sound more native-like. In fact, these features, A, are not important for intelligibility. B, they actually reduce intelligibility in international context. That's one of the reasons why my cousin had trouble understanding native speakers. Obviously, there are reasons of vocabulary as well, but pronunciation is a very important reason. So, you might be thinking, the third assumption here is that, well, but maybe my students will improve my pronunciation more if they have classes with a native speaker, right? That's what I used to think for a very long time as well. But I'm very skeptical here as well. I learned my English from Polish teachers in Poland, in a Polish university while living in Poland. Where I teach now in Flanders, in Belgium, I teach first-year university students, so 18, 19-year-olds, and I tell you what, they've never had a native English-speaking teacher. In fact, language schools don't exist in Flanders. They all study in public schools. And I'm probably the first non-Flemish teacher they've ever had in their lives. Yet, their pronunciation is absolutely impeccable. I mean, they all sound a little bit more or a little bit less Dutch when they speak English. But so what? Their pronunciation is fantastic. And perhaps on that note, I think what we need to get across to ourselves is that there's nothing wrong with having a foreign accent. Think about it. When you speak Spanish, right? And somebody says, entonces usted es de Mexico. Yeah, they recognize your accent. You're like, yeah, of course I'm from Mexico. You're proud of it, right? It's part of your linguistic identity. I mean, it would be silly for you to pretend that you're from Cuba or from Spain or from Colombia. I mean, I'm sure we've all done it for a joke with our friends. But to put on an accent on purpose every single day, I think that would be a little bit strange. And I think the same holds true for non-native speaker accents. So if you're speaking English and you sound Mexican, well, so what? That's where you're from. Your accent is an integral part of your linguistic identity, and you should be proud of it. There's no reason why you should aim to sound more British or more American. In fact, David Crystal, who's probably the most eminent expert on the English language, David Crystal, in an interview that I did with him for my website, TEFL Equity Advocates, he said that, do you know who are the only people that should actually pretend that they are from somewhere else and put on another accent? Do you know who these people are? They are spies. I don't think there are any spies here, right? If there are, don't reveal yourselves because you'd stop being a spy. So, no, I think having a foreign accent is okay. It's absolutely fine. But coming back to that question whether the students will improve their pronunciation more, well, I don't think they will. There's an interesting study done last year in 2016 in the US. They compared two groups of students. One was taught by a native speaker. The other was taught by a non-native speaker, who was also chosen because they had a particularly, pronounced foreign accent. The teachers had more or less the same qualifications, similar experience. They used the same pronunciation syllabus, more or less the same materials. They spent the same amount of time with the students in the classes. And the findings? Well, it turned out that the pronunciation of the students in both groups almost didn't improve at all. And the improvement was very similar in both groups. So if your students come to you next time saying, teacher or director, I'd like to sound more American, I'd like to sound more native-like, I think you have to tell them the truth. You have to tell them that having a native speaker teacher in a general English classroom for 3 hours a week won't change anything. Who you need is a teacher that specializes in pronunciation and in accent reduction. And you also need a lot of time, I think. And what you also need to get across to your students is that having a foreign accent is okay. There's nothing wrong with sounding Mexican when you speak English, right? It's part of your identity.
To stay up to date, follow TEFL Equity on social media. We're on Twitter at TEFL Equity, on Google+, on YouTube, and on Facebook. You can also visit the website for free resources such as lesson plans, webinars, and blog posts. And you can also support the campaign for equal professional and employment opportunities for native and non-native speakers.